what can we as a business across, at scale, across communities in New Zealand do? And I think, we're not only are we across every community, but we're also a business about food. So I think there is an opportunity for us to help. And, one of the things that, we also do is food rescue and for food banks. So I wonder, I've talked to the Salvation Army today, and we're going to get together in May to talk about whether there's a way that we can, move our food around in a more mobile way to sort of address some of the issues around access and mobility, perhaps. And this is food that we give away for free, $7 million odd a year, that we could perhaps distribute in a different way to meet the needs of these communities, because something has to give. This can't go on.
Yeah, I'm thinking sort of beyond free food. I'm thinking of actually a sort of service to drive these guys out of business, to actually have supermarket trucks out there. And as Alexia was saying, rightfully, they might not have access to cars and internet, so online shopping may not be available. So this might be another way of doing it.
Yeah, I think I surprisingly, a business opportunity wasn't the first thing that came to my head. It was actually about how can we do a community good here. But, you're right, internet isn't available for everyone. But, we do give away a lot of food. And I think the issue that we're dealing with here is food poverty. So even if there was internet, we're not sure that they'll be able to afford groceries when they need it. So if we can divert food to people in need, that stops this kind of preying behaviour, then I'd be really proud to be part of it. So I think the Salvation Army and us, and we're going to get people together in early May to see what we can come up with. But I think there should be a solution that can be had.
All right, watch this space. Kerry Hannafin, Corporate Affairs for Countdown. That would be a nice solution, wouldn't it, Mike? If actually that was a business that they got into, mobile trucks. But let me ask you, it does make you wonder. What makes people part with their money? We're talking, what's $60 for a bag of drumsticks?
Well, that's the enticing part, Wallace, is the credit, right? They can get it for a minimal pay down, but of course they don't think of the consequences of this rolling credit that just burgeons into this unmaintainable debt that they have, yeah.
Because some of these people are not thinking into next week.
No.
Because they're living day to day.
Exactly. If you have an empty cupboard, you've got screaming kids, and someone says, here's some chicken, you only have to pay me $10 now, but it's $99.
But I wonder if giving away the food is the answer. I don't see that as a sustainable
That's not a solution, no.
There needs to be some other business that would drive these guys out of business, make it not economic for them. Or
that's right.
They obviously can't be shamed out of it.
I want to get your thoughts before we go on this one. It says a comment piece in the New Zealand Herald today. The restricted licence testing is a joke. Last year, 45% of kids sitting their restricted test failed, and almost half of all drivers sent away only have to come back and pay the near on $90 it costs to resit the test. Alexia, what do you make of this issue? From the article, it appears that VTNZ standards are very rigorous, maybe overly so.
Okay, you've just lit a fire under me. So I have two boys who are on learners' licences. Now, all their mates are sitting there restricted. One of them failed because there were dog hairs on the back seat. How does a clean car have anything to do with the way those kids drive? They're borrowing cars, so they borrow grandma's car to do the testing. She hasn't, polished the fender, and they failed. It's got nothing to do with how they can drive.
Quick thought, Mike?
No, I've got that coming, so I guess it's something I'll have to learn, the system around how these guys are going to have to pass their licence.
Yes, indeed. Mike Rehu, Alexia Russell, you've been a great panel. And thank you very much for having me on in the last few days. Tim Watkin is taking over tomorrow, and Jim Mora is back on Monday. See you later.
Tō te marae, hoa mai he kōrero, kei te haere, he kaupapa, kei te karawhiua. Welcome everyone. Tonight on the program, the man who had two documents on the same EQC scoped house saying such radically different things. He tried to tell EQC first, then the government how very badly everything was going wrong. Our political reporter Craig McCulloch is with the Prime Minister in the UK. Checkpoint can tonight reveal another government agency has used the services of controversial security consultants Thompson and Clark. A petition's been launched to stop Mark Middleton from being deported. We update his situation. And the man who got up and walked towards the smashed window on the Southwest Airlines flight to risk his own life to pull another passenger back in.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina bat in a ho. A woman who lost her son in the Pike River disaster says being allowed to go down the mine's main entry tunnel today was an amazing and emotional experience. The minister responsible for re-entry, Andrew Little, went 30 metres into the tunnel with family representatives Anna Osborne and Sonia Rockhouse. Mrs Osborne, whose husband Milton was one of the 29 men killed in 2010, says it brought her closer to him than she's ever been since the day he last walked into the mine. Ms Rockhouse, whose son Ben died, says today meant a lot.
Oh, it was amazing. It was fantastic. It was very emotional. Anna and I stood there and put our hands on it and just put our faces up against it and just closed our eyes and had a cry and, yeah.
Sonia Rockhouse says this is the furthest the families have ever been down the tunnel and it's something they've waited a long time for. The Department of Internal Affairs will meet with an Auckland firm at the centre of concerns about how people might be using New Zealand company structures. Journalist Nikki Hager says Denton Morrill is helping to manage a network of New Zealand registered businesses and trusts that international money launderers linked to the Azerbaijani government may be using. Here's our political editor Jane Patterson.
Internal Affairs says a desk-based review in 2015 found Denton Morrill compliant with anti-money laundering laws, but it will now do an on-site inspection to see how it's meeting its obligations. It will meet with the company's sole director Matthew Butterfield next week to discuss issues raised. There's no evidence either he or the firm were aware of allegations of money laundering by Azerbaijan-linked companies. The government says a change to company law making it easier to identify a company's beneficial owner is in the pipeline. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
An opinion survey has found majority support for a regional fuel tax in Auckland. The Auckland Council survey last month found 52% in favour of the planned 11.5 cents a litre tax and 43% against. Our Auckland correspondent Todd Niall reports.
The survey of 4,000 Aucklanders was done before the government made its surprise announcement that it was also considering a similar tax for the whole country. The level of support is similar to feedback collated near the end of the council's consultation on its 10-year budget. The regional tax would raise about $150 million a year for transport projects, more than twice the amount currently raised by a flat levy on ratepayers. Itamaki Makoro, ko Todd Niall tēnei.
A Christchurch man on hunger strike says he's weak and tired and losing a kg of weight a day, but he's not giving up. Peter Glasson began the strike outside Southern Response's office on Tuesday after years of unsuccessfully fighting to get settlement of a claim on his quake-damaged home. He met yesterday with a member of the government's residential advisory service, and a spokesperson for him says he's grateful for the service's help. But he's not commenting on whether there's been any progress towards a settlement. In the meantime, the hunger strike continues. Air New Zealand is being blasted for what an angry traveller calls abysmal communication over flight cancellations caused by some of its engines requiring urgent maintenance. 30 wedding guests bound for Bali were temporarily stranded in Auckland, and the mother of the bride, Nisha Clark, says it was a very stressful start to what was meant to be an exciting occasion.
This was a total disconnect from customer service. They weren't offering any options. The passengers were getting mixed messages. So the ones that were at the airport that had waited an hour in line to get to the front desk were then told, no, you have to ring Air New Zealand. That was an hour wait. And it wasn't just our family that was stressed. You could see the stress on everybody.
Nisha Clark says that after many hours at the airport, the 30 stranded people managed to find other flights. A small Northland conservation group that's fought to limit exports of swamp kauri has had a victory in the Supreme Court. In a judgment issued today, the country's top court has allowed the Northland Environmental Protection Society to appeal against the Ministry for Primary Industries. Both the High Court and the Court of Appeal had rejected arguments by the Society that the Ministry was failing to regulate the swamp kauri industry according to the law. It's 4.5 minutes past 5. To sport, and All Blacks captain Kieran Reid and first-choice hooker Dane Coles are set to miss the 3-test series against France in June as they recover from long-term injuries. Reid had back surgery after the end-of-year tour to Europe, and Coles suffered a knee ligament injury. Coach Steve Hansen has told Radio Sport he doesn't think Reid will be right for the French series, but it's not a fait accompli. Coles, who missed last year's British and Irish Lions series because of concussion problems, is also taking longer than expected to recover from knee surgery. Meanwhile, the All Black great Sir Michael Jones has been elected as the New Zealand Rugby Union's newest independent board member. The NRL Chief Executive Todd Greenberg says he'll be happy to talk with Wallabies fullback Israel Folau about a possible return to league. Folau's future in rugby union has been in the spotlight since his controversial comments about gays going to hell. He started his football career in league in 2007 before trying his hand at AFL and then switching to union in 2013. Greenberg says he'd be open to discussions with Folau, notwithstanding what he said.
I mean, everyone has their own views, doesn't mean people agree with them. Being inclusive starts with everyone having an opportunity to speak. I don't agree with lots of people's views. It doesn't make it right or wrong. But, you know, if Israel decides that rugby league's a place he wants to talk about or engage in some contract talks, I'm more than happy to talk to him directly.
NRL boss Todd Greenberg. That's the news.
Roadblocks. Our government is not going to use pork barrel politics and deliver a small number of extremely expensive four-lane dual carriage expressways.
New Zealand-UK relations post-Brexit.
What we don't want is a toxic, hostile environment being created.
And a young fan wins a trip to the Football World Cup.
It might be really, really scary because there's like over 200 people in that stadium. There's like going to be 1 trillion.
Bringing you all the excitement. Morning Report with Guy Aspinall and Susie Ferguson, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, how exercise can improve the health of midlife and older women with chronic diseases. And after 10, the true story of a San Franciscan coffee entrepreneur who got caught up in Yemen's civil war. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow in the west from Northland to Vanuatu, including Coromandel Peninsula, Taumaranui and Taihepe. Cloudy periods and isolated showers. For the remainder of the North Island, mostly fine. However, the odd shower about Bay of Plenty, Taupo and the Tararua district tomorrow, and possibly from Horowhenua to Wellington tomorrow evening. Westerly gales tomorrow evening in exposed parts of the Tararua district and Hawke's Bay south of Hastings. For Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, mostly fine. Westerly gales in exposed places about the high country. The odd shower possible about the Sounds tomorrow evening. For Buller and Westland, occasional showers, some heavy tomorrow morning. For Fiordland, rain or showers, some heavy. Otago and Southland, fine spells, but showers about coastal Southland and Clutha, spreading elsewhere for a time tonight and again tomorrow evening. Westerly gales in exposed places. The Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with showers at times. It's coming up to 8 minutes past 5 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Coming up, we're in the UK with the Prime Minister, and Checkpoint can reveal another government agency is using the services or has used the services of controversial security consultants Thompson and Clark. But we begin tonight in Christchurch with a man who said he went to EQC, then the government, with documentary evidence his scope was woefully inadequate and that serious damage had been missed. So concerned was he about what was going on, he wrote to the chairman of EQC, CCing Jerry Brownlee and Ian Simpson, warning them to start learning from their mistakes and to stop repeating them. That was 2 years ago. Now, 6 weeks ago today, we featured a long interview with the CEO of EQC in which Sid Miller said sorry to claimants we'd spoken to still in dispute with the Earthquake Commission over their earthquake damage. The previous week, we'd interviewed a lawyer representing 200 claimants who said he believes there's thousands of homeowners in Christchurch who don't yet know the full extent of their earthquake damage. And later in the program, we will hear from somebody who had no idea that the home they were buying was a disaster. A fortnight ago, we revealed the cost of re-repairs so far, and during our coverage, a constant response has been that the people in charge didn't know how serious the missed damage problem was. Tonight, a man who says he tried repeatedly to tell them. It began when David Townsend received a substantial change in assessments of the damage to his property.
EQC initially assessed this house as severely structurally damaged, with the requirement to repile and redo the foundations completely. That's after the first earthquake, September the 4th, 2010. And then they turned around after the February quake and re-inspected, and all that structural damage was removed from the scope.
David Townsend was confused. How could the damage become less? A dispute process was entered into. A contractor came to assess the cost of repairs and it was still low. But David Townsend cash settled and got the contractor back to do the work. And it was then the contractor said he couldn't do the work for the sum mentioned.
And quite quickly, he ended up admitting to me that the view that he ended up giving EQC in writing in a quote was not what he had originally found himself, and he felt he was under some pressure to provide a quote that didn't reflect his own view of what the earthquake damage was.
David Townsend now had this in writing from the contractor, and he compared it with his EQC scope of damage, and the difference was striking.
What it clearly shows is the EQC asked or instructed a foundation contractor to provide a quote for what they thought was the damage, not what he believed was the damage. And he raised the issue and said, well, I don't think that you're describing the damage properly, and they just told him to stick to the quote, or to stick to their scope.
I've got his letter, which you've provided to us, and it says, and I quote, yep, I was instructed to give a quote for the scoped repairs.
Yes.
And yet he had seen damage, earthquake damage, that had not been scoped, but he was not allowed to quote on that. So, am I extrapolating too far to say that there was an awareness of earthquake damage, but because it had not been noticed in that assessment, the scope, it was not going to be dealt with?
Well, that's simply the case. They didn't deal with it in my settlement. They settled me for less. They settled me for his quote that they knew wasn't correct and that he knew wasn't correct.
So the scope said one thing, and the man who came to do the work on the scope said the damage was much greater, and you got that in writing, and you eventually got the official paperwork in writing, and you were able to compare and contrast. And you were so concerned about the disparity between what the scope was saying and what the actual damage was that you took this to the people at the very top. Who did you go to?
So, for people that don't understand, there's a lot of hidden information that we don't know as homeowners when we get faced with what they're telling us on site or what they're able to present us. They wouldn't give me a scope to show me what their current view was. They wouldn't provide me with the foundation contractor's quote that I knew existed. So I had to go, firstly, and ask EQC under the Official Information Act for all that information on my claim. Once I got that, it became obvious from that document I've supplied to you that they were misleading me, that they, purposely were overriding what a contractor said was required. So I did write to Ian Simpson himself and emailed. I filed official complaints with EQC. I even took it to Minister Brownlee's office because the house is only about 500 metres away from his electorate office in Ilam or in Brindwa. And I wrote a letter to the chairman of the board of EQC and copied Ian Simpson and Jerry Brownlee in on this particular issue and generally for the systemic issues that I uncovered for this whole claim.
Jerry Brownlee was your local constituency MP, so you took this to his office and you CC'd him into the correspondence to EQC and so on. Now, we have absolutely no idea whether or not he received that, and he must have been receiving an enormous amount of correspondence. But did you hear back from him at any stage during this process?
No. I heard from his office that they were trying to encourage EQC to manage the complaint, but it took 18 months to sort out the complaint, which to my mind was fairly blatantly obvious from the document you've seen and others. They were doing the wrong thing. But it took them 18 months to sort out the complaint, and possibly that was aided by pressure from Jerry Brownlee's electorate office. But I had no response from him directly.
When were you doing all of this, David? When did you go to Jerry Brownlee's office? When were you getting your papers under the OIA? What period was this?
So the foundation contract to come, I think it was late 2014. I discovered the information under OIA mid-2015, I would say, and raised a complaint maybe early 2015 with EQC. It dragged on for a number of months, maybe up to a year, before I started waving the flag at Jerry Brownlee's level by letters and emails. So we're talking early 2016. I think early 2016 I wrote a letter to the chairman of the board of EQC to try and highlight the systemic issues and say, look, you've got staff clearly who are doing things that are wrong. How many times have these staff been used on other claims? They're surely not just doing it on this particular claim alone. So you've got systemic issues here. I can give you names. I can let you investigate. Please get to the bottom of it. They didn't seem interested in investigating the systemic issues.
So that was 2 years ago. And by then, of course, we have the MB report, we have the Audit Office report. There's been quite a bit of whistleblowing already about what was going wrong. But now we are being told that people are surprised by the extent of the damage that is only just being discovered. Are you surprised by this?
I find it astounding that the issues that have been raised and publicly in the press, by yourself over the years, by other media organisations, the failed repairs have been around as an issue publicly for a very long time. And look, I'm not the only one, and by far the only one, that's raised the issues at this level. I'm a little bit gobsmacked it's taken this long to come to the surface, but I mean, absolutely, yeah, it needs to, and it needs to be properly addressed.
David Townsend. Now we have also managed to talk to the contractor. In this case, he confirms he's written that letter, he had written that letter, and he told us scopes were often different from the actual damage. He also told us he too attempted to warn people what was going on. We're working to establish some details around what he told us, and we'll bring his story to you at a later stage. Checkpoint approached former EQC Minister Jerry Brownlee, of course local MP for David Townsend this afternoon. A spokesperson told us his office have found the contact they have had with Mr Townsend and say they provided all the support a constituency MP is able to offer. Later in the program, we'll talk to somebody who bought a home with earthquake damage they did not know about. But with the time at 17 minutes past 5, let's move on. Checkpoint can reveal tonight another government agency has used the services of controversial security consultants Thompson & Clark. The firm is currently the subject of a State Services Commission investigation into whether its relationship with the government earthquake insurer Southern Response and the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment breached standards of integrity and conduct. Both are accused of hiring Thompson & Clark private investigators to spy on members of the public. Now, we know the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade worked with the firm too. Zach Fleming has more.
Early 2016, the signing of the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal in Auckland. Dignitaries from the US, Japan, Malaysia, Vietnam, Singapore, Brunei, Australia, Canada, Mexico, Chile and Peru descended on the Sky City Convention Centre. So did thousands of protesters. The police were ready, deploying 164 constables around the city, who'd been specially trained to protect the VIPs. But the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade made its own security arrangements, using controversial security firm Thompson & Clark to provide extra security. MFAT staff met with the firm's bosses twice prior to the signing to discuss security planning and staffing. But when asked for copies of correspondence between MFAT and Thompson & Clark, MFAT said none exists. MFAT paid Thompson & Clark $12,618 for its services, $1,800 for planning, $2,700 for Thompson & Clark staff time and attendance, $5,855 for security guards, $585 for a management fee, and taxpayers even footed the bill for Thompson & Clark director Gavin Clark's parking, $32.17.
Spying, stalking, harassing and intimidating. That's what Thompson & Clark have been accused of doing on behalf of the now state-owned insurer Southern Response.
That was RNZ political reporter May Heron on March 16. A State Services Commission investigation was launched, which has since been widened to include alleged spying on Greenpeace for the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. And that relationship between MB and Thompson & Clark reportedly started after the firm provided security for a petroleum conference. similar to how it provided security for MFAT around the TPP. MFAT wouldn't be interviewed, but in a statement said police were only there to deal with lawbreakers, so Thompson & Clark was contracted to arrange venue security, which included accreditations, access control, contingency and escalation plans, and oversight on the day. MFAT said there's no record of correspondence between it and Thompson & Clark because their meetings were coordinated by the event management company. For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
5:20. New Zealand has joined 3 of its key security allies to present a very united front against Russia after a top-secret intelligence briefing in London. In the early hours of this morning, New Zealand time, Jacinda Ardern met with her counterparts from Britain, Canada and Australia, who together, along with the US, are known as the Five Eyes, of course. This came at the end of a whirlwind day for the Prime Minister, who'd shuttled through a series of meetings with world leaders and royalty. Our political reporter, Craig McCulloch, is also there in London.
A high-powered meeting designed to send a message. Britain has its sights on Russia.
I think it does show that the world is prepared to take action to protect the rules and the norms that protect us all.
The British Prime Minister Theresa May called the briefing several days ago, with the leaders all in the same city at the same time. Australia's Malcolm Turnbull, Canada's Justin Trudeau, and of course Jacinda Ardern.
We do need to make sure that we are focusing on enforcing rules-based order. We cannot allow the use of chemical weapons to go unanswered. Beyond that, I won't be saying much more. What action can we expect?
But while Jacinda Ardern won't give much away about the top-secret briefing, we know 3 major topics were on the agenda, and all with links to Russia. The Salisbury nerve agent attack, the use of suspected chemical weapons in Syria, and a recent surge of cyber attacks. Ms Ardern was asked whether New Zealand's position on any of those matters had changed as a result of her meetings.
No, because I think our position and stance has been consistent and has been welcomed by our partners.
The meeting capped off a jam-packed day for the Prime Minister. She came straight from a one-on-one sit-down with Mrs May at number 10 Downing Street, their first official meeting. Before that, there was a bilateral with the Fijian Prime Minister Frank Bainimarama and a brush with royalty, meeting Charles and Camilla, the Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall. But the week-long trip's not just about building relationships, it's also about building Jacinda Ardern's brand on the world stage.
And we can do better. The Prime Minister from New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern!
London's Mayor Sadiq Khan introducing the Prime Minister alongside Justin Trudeau at a town hall event marking women's suffrage earlier in the day. The two mingled with students and fielded questions about gender equality.
What advice would you give to a girl like me looking to become Prime Minister?
Great question. So my advice to anyone who wants to be a Prime Minister, never give up on believing that you can do it. Because the biggest barrier, I think, for us achieving some of our goals is our own belief that we can't.
But if Ms Ardern lacked any belief in herself, she didn't show it. Indeed, neither did those around her.
Well, firstly, I spent most of the meeting gushing about how privileged I am to meet your Prime Minister. Her election was celebrated here in London. Didn't cost much to
get that answer, actually.
Tomorrow, the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting formally gets underway in London. All but 2 of the 53 Commonwealth countries have sent their leaders to discuss everything from Russia and trade to climate change. But another meeting at Buckingham Palace is likely to grab a share of the headlines. At roughly 3:30 in the morning, Jacinda Ardern will meet the Queen for the first time. From London for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
Well, you would have heard Sadiq Khan and Craig's package, and after the town hall meeting, the London Mayor Sadiq Khan, accompanied by Ms Ardern, talked to reporters about New Zealand's visa access to the UK.
One of the things that I've been stressing since the Brexit vote is London is open. London is open to talent, to creativity, to business, to entrepreneurship. And look at the history of the relationship between London and New Zealand. It's been a two-way stream. Many Londoners go to New Zealand and vice versa. I think our strength as a city is the people that come here. The Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda, talked about diversity being a strength during the session with the young people. I firmly believe that, and that includes the diversity that comes from New Zealand. Your energy, your enthusiasm, you contribute to London being the greatest city in the world, and that needs to carry on. And what we don't want is a toxic, hostile environment being created, so people in New Zealand are under the mistaken impression that we're going to somehow become insular, inward-looking. No, no, no. Our future is in us continuing to be a diverse city and us continuing to be a welcoming place for the talent from New Zealand.
Do you have similar views to your predecessor on the issue of the freedom of movement between some Commonwealth countries?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, one of the great things about having, for the first time in more than 30 years, the Commonwealth Health Conference taking place here in London is our ability to show off our great city, and that includes our diversity. There is no other city that could have hosted this which would have had the diaspora communities we have from all 52 other members of the Commonwealth. Roughly speaking, 30,000 Londoners who are originally from New Zealand, and many more, but those who are declared. And there are many others across the country and across the Commonwealth. We've got examples of people settling in the London, and it's a two-way thing. They contribute to London, and hopefully London contributes to the development of New Zealand as well. And by the way, there are many, many Londoners who love going to New Zealand, not just for work and not just for business, not just for tourism, but because they've got friends and family who are in the Southern Hemisphere as well. That's really important.
Sadiq Khan being very charming in London. It's 5:25. Mark Middleton believes he could be deported to the UK as early as next week. Immigration New Zealand says Mr Middleton, who came to New Zealand as a 4-year-old with his parents 56 years ago, is an overstayer. It says Mr Middleton was issued a 30-day visitor's visa in 1986 after a holiday in Fiji and has been an illegal immigrant ever since. He's never been back to the UK. By the way, in those 56 years, Mr Middleton's stepdaughter, 13-year-old Lower Hutt girl Carla Cardno, was murdered by Paul Joseph Daly, who abducted her as she rode her bike home from local shops in 1989. And in 2001, Mark Middleton did receive a suspended prison sentence for threatening to kill Daly should he ever be released from prison. He has no other convictions, and until he lost his job as a result of Immigration New Zealand saying that his employers could no longer retain him, he was the family's breadwinner. His partner, Carla's mum, Veronica, and he now raised their teenage son together. That's Carla's half-brother, of course. The Sensible Sentencing Trust has today launched a petition to stop Mr Middleton's deportation. The trust cites a case of a pedophile and a rapist who, despite convictions, have both been allowed to stay in New Zealand. This afternoon, Mark Middleton told me he's still awaiting a final decision on his fate from Associate Immigration Minister Chris Fa'afoy, and had been to Parliament yesterday to drop off documents to prove his life is in New Zealand.
Just letters and the fact that I came here in 1962 with my parents, and proof that I'd started school at Eastern Hutt in 1962, and then my schooling right through, basically from there to Wainui to Stokes Valley, and then on to Walcott and Intermediate and high school.
Boy, you're a Wellingtonian, aren't you? Hard out.
Hard out, mate. Hard out, Wellingtonian. I love Wellington, mate. It's the best city in the world. I do like Auckland, though. I do like to go to Auckland, but I've got to say, my heart's in Wellington. It's a dang good place, really.
And I guess that's your message to the Associate Minister, isn't it? Your heart is in Wellington, your life is in Wellington, your family is in Wellington. You are really very much a Wellingtonian.
Pretty much, yep. You know, I've got kids here, and I say I've had a life here. I've had a full life here, to be honest with you.
A very full life. The other day when we talked to you, you were just about to go and see your boss, who had been required by Immigration New Zealand to let you go. What happened in that meeting?
Oh, they were very, I've got to say, they've been very, very supportive of me, and they have offered me assistance at every turn. And unfortunately, they are required by law to terminate my employment, so you know, they had to do that. They didn't really have a choice.
So at the moment you are unemployed.
I'm unemployed and unemployable.
and awaiting the discretion of the Associate Minister.
Yeah, I sure am. Yep, I sure am. So we're just going to have to, I guess it's a wait and see game now, and if he turns me down, then I'll be probably on the plane next week.
It could potentially be that quick, could it? If the Associate Minister doesn't effectively override Immigration New Zealand, which of course he has the discretion to do, you could be gone as early as next week.
I would say so, yep. I hear it's snowing back there. So I have to get an anorak or something. Yeah. So it's pretty, it's strange days. What can I say? It'll be, I've got to, I'm 60, so I've got to start all over again, somewhere else. I'll just have to feed money back to my family and make sure that they can pay their bills and pay their way. So probably end up having to get a couple of jobs over there if I have to.
Mark Middleton talking to us earlier this afternoon. We've tried to be in touch with the Associate Minister's office. No update from him. You are with Checkpoint on RNZ. Coming up, a $300,000 mortgage, a $260,000 repair bill, and EQC offers $48,000. Yes, the Christchurch homeowner who bought a home after the quakes thinking it had been fixed finds herself in negative equity and really up against it. A man who desperately tried to save another passenger from being sucked out the window of a Southwest Airlines plane flight yesterday describes pure terror in the sky. This is a man who walked towards a really life-threatening situation. Remarkable interview. And the number of freedom campers visiting New Zealand has doubled in 2 years. Nona is next with business news. There she is. If you're watching, on the other side of me, Katrina Batten. We'd love your feedback. Text 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. But let's get to the 5:30 headlines while it's still 5:30.
It's been revealed that another government agency, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, also used the controversial firm Thomson & Clark to provide security services for the 2016 Trans-Pacific Partnership signing in Auckland. The State Services Commission is currently investigating allegations Thomson & Clark spied on insurance claimants for Southern Response and also spied on members of Greenpeace for the Ministry for Business, Innovation and Employment. Anna Osborne, whose husband Milton was one of the 29 men killed in the Pike River mine explosions in 2010, says going into the entry tunnel today brought her closer to him than she's ever been since the day he last walked into the mine. The minister responsible for Pike River re-entry, Andrew Little, accompanied family representatives Anna Osborne and Sonia Rockhouse when they went 30 metres into the tunnel today. The Department of Internal Affairs is to meet an Auckland firm mentioned in relation to concerns that New Zealand companies may be caught up in an international money laundering. Journalist Nikki Hager says Denton Morrill is helping to manage a network of New Zealand registered businesses and trusts that may be used by international money launderers linked to the Azerbaijani government. An angry traveller has lambasted Air New Zealand for shocking communication over flight cancellations due to engines needing urgent maintenance. 30 wedding guests bound for Bali were temporarily stranded in Auckland in what the bride's mother says was a very stressful start to what should be an exciting occasion. Christchurch man Peter Glasson says he's weak and tired after 2 days on hunger strike, but he refuses to give up. Mr Glasson began the strike outside Southern Response's office on Tuesday after years of failing to settle a claim on his quake-damaged home. And the Supreme Court has today given the go-ahead to the Northland Environmental Protection Society to appeal against the Ministry for Primary Industries over swamp kauri exports. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6 o'clock.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten. You can go and have a cup of tea. It's 27 minutes away.
I will.
Goodness gracious. Unusually early. Thanks for being here, Nona Peltier. Inflation rose 0.5% in the first quarter of the year, but it slowed annually.
That's because...
how is that possible?
Well, because we had some slowing of house price related costs, etc., earlier in the year, earlier in the period.
Right.
So if you think about it in a year, we had a bit of sluggish house-related activity, and that caused the overall annual rate to fall. So we went to, what, 1.1%? For the year to the end of March.
The Reserve Bank's range, of course, is 1 to 3, isn't it?
It's
got to be. So, boy, they
Focus on the 2.
Yeah,
it's on the 2. The target is the 2. So it's the range is 1 to 3. So we're in the range. But the target is definitely 2.
It's low in the range, isn't it? So, so what's that mean for interest rates, do you think? I mean, we're reading the tea leaves here, aren't we? The Reserve Bank decides
We're not reading the tea leaves much, I have to say, because really almost everybody is expecting interest rates to rise potentially.
Off the back of a 1.1.
In mid-August, well, 2019. So we're not looking at an interest rate hike for a long time. Like, that's more than a year and, you know, potentially August 2019.
Yeah.
And that's not even for sure. Because interest rates are, inflation is low everywhere, and so we're not really seeing that. However, not everything is, there are price rises, believe me. And one of the things we talked about today was the price of cigarettes. Guess how much 25 cigarettes cost now?
I have absolutely no idea, and I feel I should know, but if I was going to guess, I'd say $30 a packet.
35.
Wow.
Not cheap. $35. Wow.
Yeah, it's a lot of money.
It is an awful lot of money, and there were some other pressures too. There were some volatile items that there always are, like food, for example, energy and fuel. These were some price pressures, but overall, the core inflation was pretty muted, and so we're not going to see interest rates rise for a while. And it was interesting. The new governor of the Reserve Bank, Adrian Orr, was on our 9 to noon program this morning.
And that interview is available online.
It is
really recommended, because this is an interesting man and an interesting job.
He's a very good communicator. If you've ever had the opportunity to see him in action, I saw him once hosting an event in Auckland of international long-term fund managers, and he was not at all like a banker, not at all like a central banker. So I expect that we're going to hear a lot more from him, and he's very committed to that 2% target. He said there's no need to move things around. He said keeping the 2% target is a very good thing. It tells the market that's what they're looking at, and that gives the market certainty. And you know what? That's what we saw in our markets today.
Nice segue. What did they do?
Well, the dollar's trading at 73.3 US cents, 93.8 Australian, and 51.6 pence. There was a slight blip up just after the inflation data come out, because people were a little bit, it was a little bit higher than expectations, but, hey, short-lived. In terms of our top 50 index, well, honestly, it rose only a handful of points, up 4 to 8,373. And that's it.
Thank you very much indeed. We will discuss at a later date why that 1 to 3% range has been set and why 2% is the target. 23.5 to 6. A man who tried desperately to stop passenger Jennifer Riordan from being sucked out of the window of Southwest Airlines flight 1380 yesterday has described pure terror in the sky. Tim McGinty and his wife Kristen were sitting a few rows ahead of Jennifer Riordan when the left engine exploded just 20 minutes into the flight, causing shrapnel to break the window and sucking Mrs. Riordan out of her seat. Despite the cabin losing pressure and the plane descending very quickly for an emergency landing, Mr. McGinty, along with a retired nurse, a firefighter, just the three of them, abandoned their oxygen masks and their seats and risked their lives going to help.
You just do what you do, I guess. I would think anybody would. I was maybe closer than most men, I guess. I don't know. You just do it.
Can you describe what happened? Can you describe those moments?
Well, I mean, the engine blew, and it was massive, very, very, very loud, and apparently I think the window blew probably about the same time. I guess the shrapnel busted the window. And anyway, so, we were locked in tight as we could be, bracing ourselves because we were falling. I think we fell 10,000 foot in 5 minutes or something. That pilot was brilliant and awesome and saved everybody's life. So anyway, during that period, somebody screamed, and back behind us on the left, the poor lady was hanging out the window and locked in by her seatbelt. So I went to try to get her in, and I couldn't. I just couldn't do it. I could not do it. I get her a little bit, not enough. And guy Andrew showed up, and between the two of us, we finally got her in. And he and RN that was on the plane started CPR. They started, trying to resuscitate her and kind of trying to evaluate her. Anyway, but that pilot could have had a bad 5 minutes, and it would have been the end. I think it's the way it felt. I don't know as much about the mechanics of the whole situation as I should maybe, but it was it felt like the end. It sure did. It felt like the end. I don't know if it was or wasn't, but I know that decompression was happening at a high rate, and everything was rattling, and I was worried about the structure of the craft, but. Anyway, that's what happened. That's what happened. That's just what went down.
What's it like to be in a plane that is decompressing and falling? Because you wouldn't even really understand what the hell was happening, right? Or why it was happening, or what was going on. It must be confusing, terrifying, inexplicable.
It is. I mean, everybody's. You see you don't see terror very often, but that was pure terror. You never heard so many people scream it simultaneously. Oxygen masks falling. I mean, it was numbing to me. I mean, it was beyond fearful. It was numbing to me. It was just numbing. And I think everybody that was on that flight is still trying to get their mind around the whole situation, to be honest with you.
Tim, you say it was numbing, but in fact you got up. So when all of this was happening, as the plane was falling, as it was decompressing with an open window, you got up and walked towards where the trouble was. Do you? That was just.
When you see somebody hanging out the window, I don't think anybody's going to leave them there. You start thinking about things like, does she have a family? I mean, you just start thinking about different things, and I'm no different than anybody. Nobody's going to leave that alone. You're just not going to do it. You're just not going to do it. I just maybe get lucky enough to get there quicker.
Let's talk about the pilot. What an extraordinary woman, eh?
Yeah, beyond measure. Situation like that, I've never really been in one like that, but I can tell you from that experience, it makes me recognize and appreciate her mindset, her reaction, and her action so much, because I realize that there's a limited amount of people that would react that way. Mm-hmm. And she handled it perfectly, and she saved every life in that plane that was safe. Andrew, he showed up. I was, doing everything I could, and it wasn't enough. I wasn't gaining any ground, and when he showed up between the two of us, what we could get done was enough. And then he and Peggy, the RN, whenever they popped in, they looked to me like they'd worked together their whole life. They'd never met each other. They knew exactly what each other was thinking. They were so well trained and reacted so well under pressure. I was in awe of them. It was awesome. It really was. And if there was any chance that could have saved her, they would have saved her. If there was any chance, then that would have saved her. Those people knew exactly. When there was a nice doctor that came up that was helping with trying to help with the CRP as far as like the mask, you help them breathe a little bit. And I can just tell you, if she could have been saved, it would have been done. I hope that family knows that.
Tim McGinty, who got up and risked his life to try to save Jennifer Riordan, talking to us earlier this afternoon. It's 16 and a half minutes to 6. You are with Checkpoint on RNZ. Changes to companies' law to help prevent the New Zealand system being exploited are in the pipeline. Investigative journalist Nikki Hager has identified an Auckland company, Denton Morell, is helping to manage a network of New Zealand registered companies and trusts for clients which may be used by international money launderers. There is no evidence either Denton Morel or its director were aware of allegations of money laundering by Azerbaijan-linked companies. However, Internal Affairs says it will meet the sole director, Matthew Butterfield, next week to discuss the issues raised in the story. It says a desk-based review in 2015 found the company to be compliant with anti-money laundering laws, but it will now conduct an on-site inspection to see how Denton Morel is meeting its obligations. Mr Butterfield has declined to comment. Very welcome to call us in on Checkpoint if you'd like to. The Commerce Minister, Chris Whaafoy, told our political editor, Jane Patterson, that officials have now been working on a law change for some time.
We're going to be starting a process to increase the transparency around beneficial ownership of companies so we can get to the bottom of who actually is the beneficial owner of a company. I think in this instance, the way that the system is set up, it hasn't allowed that.
So what actually needs to happen to make that system more transparent?
I think in plain English, making sure you know exactly who is the beneficial owner of a company. I think what you've seen in the past is law changes to ensure that there is a New Zealand owner or director registered against the company. But as we've seen in this case, that doesn't tell you exactly who is behind the company, who might be the beneficial owner. And we've been working with officials for some months now to get to a stage where we can put that issue out to the public to ask for submissions to see how we might tackle exactly how we go about that to increase the transparency for who is behind the companies.
Does this create a reputational concern for New Zealand in terms of the company law situation at the moment?
I think we've actually got a pretty good name, but what I think it does highlight is we have to be vigilant. Changes were obviously made around trusts, but if things pop up in new ways of taking advantages of systems that do have good reputations around the world do eventuate, we've got to make sure that the system can move with it to make sure it is minimised as much as possible. Beneficial ownership and knowing who's behind those companies, who is actually running them and who is actually getting the benefit of them. And in this case, I think would be useful, which is why we've got that process getting underway at the end of next month.
That's the Commerce Minister, Chris Whaafoy, speaking to our political editor, Jane Patterson. The number of international tourists who freedom camped while visiting New Zealand has nearly doubled in 2 years. A new report from the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment shows there were 60,000 foreign freedom campers in 2015, with the numbers swelling to around 110,000 last year. The Conservation Minister says rules set up around freedom camping for the Rugby World Cup back in 2011 no longer apply, and it's time to either clamp down or find a way to make the users pay. Our reporter Tracy Neal filed this report from a freedom camping think tank in Nelson.
Love them, or more frequently perhaps hate them, freedom campers are here to stay. And New Zealand is perfect for this kind of touring, according to Steve Hanrahan from tourism industry Aotearoa.
New Zealand is by default a touring destination where driving through the country is a great way to see it as opposed to flying from point to point. So with that, that brings some of the freedom camping issues.
But there's agreement it's time to better manage those issues, like their habit of using our great outdoors as a toilet or hogging all the supermarket car parks with giant camper vans. Local Government Minister Nanaia Mahuta, who gave the opening speech at today's Freedom Camping Symposium in Nelson, explains why it's time for change.
We've seen over the last few years the negative impacts of freedom camping in communities wanting to see some movement in this area. So in my mind, the motivation and the imperative has been driven from our local communities saying we've got to do things differently.
The working group announced yesterday will make recommendations to the government on freedom camping policy. A member of the group, Grant Webster, says it's the best tool he's seen for triggering positive change. He also heads the country's largest campervan rental company, Tourism Holdings, and says people shouldn't ignore the benefits freedom camping brings to New Zealand.
This kind of travel and tourism can really create dispersal to broader regions. It's going to help economic growth if we continue it. If we shut it down, we really are going to be shooting ourselves in the foot.
MBIE's figures also show that freedom campers visit almost twice as many regions as regular visitors. Conservation Minister Eugenie Sage says some of these communities, particularly the smaller ones, don't think it's fair they should be paying their rates to develop facilities like toilets for freedom campers. She says that's leading to growing resentment, and the country can't afford to dent its reputation for throwing down the welcome mat to one and all.
Tourism is our number one export industry. It relies on New Zealanders welcoming visitors. We need to ensure that locals can enjoy their local reserves without them being congested with vehicles, and we need to ensure that facilities are provided.
Ms Sage says the rules set up in 2011 are no longer suitable, and it's time to consider tougher options.
Do we need to move to an approach like France, where vehicle camping is prohibited, except in designated areas? How do we ensure that users, the vehicle and roadside campers, contribute to the costs of the facilities that they are using?
The Mayor of Tasman District, Richard Kempthorne, says councils are also looking at a model freedom camping bylaw which can be adjusted easily to suit each area.
One of the things we'll be looking at is having standardised signage, so wherever freedom campers go around the country, they will be looking at the same signs, and that'll make much more sense.
Mr Kempthorne acknowledges a one-size-fits-all approach would make it easier for tourists, but says it could never work for councils because each has its own unique territory to manage. In Nelson for Checkpoint, Tracy Neal.
Tracy's based in Nelson, of course, one of our excellent regionals team. It's 10 minutes to 6. Donald Trump says he will do everything possible to make a meeting with the North Korean leader a worldwide success. He says preparations are advancing for the first ever summit with Kim Jong-un after a secret visit to Pyongyang by the CIA Director Mike Pompeo. His comments come on day 2 of talks with Japanese leader Shinzo Abe, who's in the US to talk trade, but also to make sure his country's alliance with the US isn't about to be sold down the river in any deal between, well, the US and North Korea. Quite extraordinary, isn't it? With more, here's the BBC's Barbara Plett-Usher.
The President of the United States and the Prime Minister of Japan.
President Trump emerged from his 2-day retreat with Japan's Prime Minister optimistic about prospects for a North Korea summit.
We've never been in a position like this with that regime, whether it's father, grandfather, or son.
He seemed confident the North Koreans are serious, confirming that his CIA director Mike Pompeo has secretly sounded out Kim Jong-un's willingness to negotiate away his nuclear weapons. But the president made clear he's still ready to walk away from the plan.
If I think that it's a meeting that is not going to be fruitful, we're not going to go. If the meeting when I'm there is not fruitful, I will respectfully leave the meeting.
Shinzo Abe has invested a lot in what he thought was a fruitful relationship. After staking out a hawkish position on North Korea, he wanted to make sure Japan wouldn't lose out if the Americans sit down with Pyongyang. And Trump delivered. He promised to raise the issue of kidnapped Japanese citizens and to hold a tough line throughout any negotiations.
Just because North Korea is responding to dialogue, there should be no reward. Maximum pressure should be maintained, and actual implementation of concrete actions will be demanded. This firm policy has been completely shared between us.
President Trump went to some length to reassure Shinzo Abe that Japan would not be sidelined by this burst of diplomacy over North Korea, to convey that the U.S. would look out for its interests and remained committed to its security. But when it came to disagreements over trade, Mr. Trump didn't give any ground. Despite a chummy round of golf, Trump didn't give the Japanese Prime Minister the tariff exemptions he was looking for, bargaining instead for reductions in the trade deficit. But Abe is well aware that Trump's big diplomatic adventure with North Korea would also reshape regional relations. And for that, he needs to secure a place at the table.
Barbara Plett-Usher with that report. Closer to home, the evacuation of residents on the ash-covered Vanuatu island of Ambai is finally getting underway as food supplies dwindle and disease starts to spread. People are being moved from the worst affected areas to the east coast, but with the volcano at the island centre still stirring, a mass evacuation off the island is again being contemplated. And there are fears that some of the 11,000 residents who have struggled for weeks could starve unless they get really meaningful assistance. RNZ Pacific's Jamie Tahana reports.
In Umbai's north, an Anglican priest, William Bice, says his village has been blanketed in a layer of ash some 20 to 30 centimetres thick. The weight of it has collapsed some roofs, plant life has been smothered, and the stream where people get their water has turned into a thick, ash-laden sludge. As food supplies dwindle and disease starts to spread, Father Bice says the situation is becoming desperate.
In my opinion, I think if we live from now up until next week without any assistance from the government, I think a lot of people will starve and a lot of people will die because of no food. At the moment, we have an outbreak of flu and sore throat because of the smell of the volcano.
In the northeast, the 383 students at St Patrick's College were ordered home last Friday when the school made the decision to cancel exams. Its principal, Kathleen Tahi, says ash has swept into the valley where her school sits, invading every building and making breathing a battle.
All the classrooms have been filled with ash. All buildings around the college have been filled with ash. And students just walk around with cloth over their noses and mouths to block the ash or the dust from getting into their noses and mouths. We're really worried.
She says students had little to eat or drink.
So water tanks are all contaminated. For food, the students during that time that have no vegetables, nothing to eat. The students just eat noodles.
Umbai's 11,000 people were evacuated off the island at the end of last year, when the volcano at its centre, Manarawui, erupted. They returned a little over a month later, but in March the volcano stirred once more, again blanketing the island in ash and acid rain. But this time the government appears in less of a rush to get them off. The National Disaster Management Office says they're working through phases, starting with moving people to the east and then deciding whether to go further from there. The head of UNICEF in Vanuatu, Andrew Parker, says 750 people have already been moved across the island.
The government does not wish to get into an endless evacuation repatriation circuit, and hence is looking at the reality that Ambai's volcanoes are not likely to become totally dormant again in the short term.
A disaster office spokesperson, Presley Tari, says a patrol boat full of paramilitary personnel arrived on Ambai on Wednesday and are now going village to village carrying out assessments and helping people move. Amid signs the volcanic activity may be starting to ease, Mr Tari says officials will wait until they've carried out assessments for 4 days before a decision on whether to flee the island again will be made.
They already arrived there around yesterday at 10 o'clock and they all set up. And today is the first day of the assessment. They're going to be 4 days. After this, they come up with a report for the on-island relocation. Then our next step is the off-island relocation. So that's where we're going to make another decision whether we're still going to off-island or not.
Mr Tari says provincial officials are speaking with chiefs on nearby Maiwo and Pentecost, while a reconciliation ceremony is due to be held on Santo after some landowners were rankled with how last year's evacuation was handled. But if talks and plans are underway, then that's news to William Bice on North Ambai. He says the government response has not been good enough, with villagers waiting in limbo to hear when and where they will go.
People keep coming, they say they have no food, and they say in a couple of days there will be no food for them. Well, the provincial government gave us little rice. You try imagine the whole of Ambai being affected with no food at the moment, and if the provincial government stays silent, people will die. I think the government should do something very quick to help save people's lives.
That's a sentiment also shared by Kathleen Tahi, who says she's yet to hear anything either. This is Jamie Tahana.
Coming up to 2 minutes to 6, a lot of feedback coming in tonight on a variety of issues. We began, of course, in Christchurch. We're going back there after the news at 6. And Ken texted in, I was labouring for builders in Christchurch post-quakes. Most were good, but despaired at having to sign off when we knew or suspected more damage than scope said. And that's precisely what we were discussing with David Townsend, that the scope was identifying much smaller or lower amounts of damage than was actually the case. David Townsend had documentation to prove that was the case and still couldn't get it changed. He went to EQC recently went to the government. We'll be looking at somebody who purchased a house and did not know the damage they were buying after 6. A lot of feedback is always on Freedom Campers. Freedom Camping, van hire companies making a fortune out of this. Maybe they could sponsor, pay or provide camping grounds. Also, there's a cost to our landscape. White boxes filling up our lakes and country views. Also, Kaumātua told me she didn't feel good taking her mokopuna to the pipi beds with the people camping right by them or picnicking on the grass, which may have been urinated on recently or worse, Meg, we suspect. I wonder if we have to be careful in Freedom Camping rules and the crossover with people sleeping rough and in cars, especially going into winter. A lot of people get very exercised by Freedom Camping. In fact, one person is getting exercised by us calling it that, says it's fake news to even describe them in those terms, and they're polluters and rascals. Thank you very much for pointing that out. Hi, John. Am I missing something? You're a journalist, not Mark's mate. I didn't hear you asking probing questions. You can't tell immigration. You can't tell me immigration want to send him home for overlooking filling in a document, Rob. Well, we did speak to Mark Middleton the other day. Mark Middleton arrived here 56 years ago. We asked him about that. It is very confusing, the circumstances. He doesn't actually have his documentation, Rob, so he doesn't quite know why he is being sent home. But we did discuss with him leaving New Zealand in 1986 and going to Fiji on holiday, the only time he's ever left. He was allowed back into the country and he hasn't heard from anyone since. So yes, we did put those questions to Mark Middleton. It's 6 o'clock.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. The Minister responsible for Pike River re-entry, Andrew Little, says he went into the mine's entry tunnel or drift today to show safe re-entry is possible. Mr Little went 30 metres into the tunnel with family representatives Anna Osborne and Sonia Rockhouse, who both lost a family member in the 2010 disaster. The mine's drift is sealed at the 30-metre mark to stop methane leaking out. Mr Little says it was an emotional journey.
A bit of a milestone. We wanted to go up to the mine portal and the drift to have a look and to understand the magnitude of the task that now lies in front of us. So it was good to be able to do that with two of the family representatives, knowing the job that we have ahead of us.
Andrew Little says a manned re-entry of the drift beyond the point reached today is still expected by next March. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade can now be added to the list of government agencies that have used the services of the controversial security firm Thomson & Clarke. The firm is being investigated by the State Services Commission over allegations that the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment used it to spy on Greenpeace staff and customers of Southern Response. It's now emerged that Foreign Affairs hired the firm to secure Auckland's Sky City Convention Centre for the signing of the TPP trade deal in 2016. An invoice paid by the ministry and released to Checkpoint under the Official Information Act shows Thomson & Clarke was paid $12,600 for doing the job. Hundreds of people have been asked if they would like to alter their submissions on a medicinal cannabis bill if in making them they've admitted breaking the law or have disclosed personal health issues. Parliament's Health Committee is hearing submissions on the bill which lays the ground for a regulated medicinal cannabis industry. The submissions are searchable and there's nothing to stop the police or employers using the information. The Clerk of the House of Representatives, David Wilson, says with possession of cannabis still a crime, the committee is alerting people that their submissions will be public and giving them a range of options.
They can choose to do nothing and leave their submission with the committee as it is, because the committee's still got all of the submissions. They can remove their name from it and make it anonymous. They can edit it and just take out some of the details if they like, or if they really want to, they can withdraw their submission completely, but the choice is up to them.
The Clerk of the House, David Wilson. The Prime Minister is to have a private audience with the Queen at Buckingham Palace early tomorrow morning New Zealand time as the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, or CHOGM, formally gets underway. Our political reporter Craig McCulloch is covering Jacinda Ardern's European trip.
Ms Ardern will begin her day with the official opening of CHOGM, including the traditional group photo of all the leaders in attendance. This year, all but 2 of the 53 members have sent their leader, an unusually high turnout. It's expected to be the last CHOGM the Queen attends in person. Ms Ardern will have a 20-minute meeting with the Queen as one of the new leaders. From London, Craig McCulloch.
In a major backdown, Australia's live export industry has agreed to back an opposition Labor policy for an independent animal welfare inspector. The industry is under renewed pressure over animal welfare standards since news broke of a deadly shipment of sheep to the Middle East. Here's the ABC's Lucy Barber.
The industry's long opposed the policy, but in the wake of the latest scandal in which 2,500 sheep died of heat stress on board a ship to the Middle East, the Live Exporters Council has changed its tune. It met yesterday and unanimously backed the proposal for an inspector to oversee animal welfare. Victorian Liberal MP Jason Wood has told AM he backs a full ban of live exports to the Middle East.
If it doesn't suit the customers of the Middle East because of their religious beliefs, well, so be it.
Mr Wood says his constituents have been outraged by the latest scandal.
Lucy Barber in Canberra. The first repatriation of Defence Force personnel buried around the world between 1955 and 1971 will officially begin next week. The bodies of 3 airmen will be disinterred from cemeteries in Fiji and American Samoa and brought back to New Zealand on May the 7th. The 2 in Fiji are Flight Lieutenant George Beban and leading aircraftman Ralph Scott, who both died of natural causes. Navy engineering mechanic Russell Moore died in an accident on HMNZS Auckland in 1956 and was buried in American Samoa. The Defence Force says up to 37 servicemen buried in Britain, Malaysia, Singapore and Korea between 1955 and 1971 could be repatriated if their families wish, thanks to a policy change announced last year. It's 5:05. Sport and the All Black great Sir Michael Jones says he counts Australian rugby international Israel Folau as a friend, but feels his comments about homosexuals are misplaced. Sir Michael, who was today elected to the NZRU board, says personal beliefs should be expressed with love and grace. He says with wisdom, Folau might have expressed himself differently, rather than say gay people will end up in hell.
In terms of my faith, it's very much a faith built on love and grace. There's members of my family from those communities, and we love them. They're very integral in our lives, and they're a big part of who we are.
Sir Michael Jones. The Utah Jazz targeted New Zealand basketballer Steven Adams, and the strategy paid off as they beat the Oklahoma City Thunder 102-95 in Game 2 of their NBA Western Conference Series playoff. Adams got into foul trouble early on and eventually fouled out with 3 minutes to go. The result levels the best of 7 series at 1 game all. Meanwhile, the veteran Breakers forward Mika Vukona, who turns 36 next month, is heading to Queensland to continue his career. The Brisbane Bullets have signed him for 2 years. The former Black Cap Michael Papps has announced his retirement from first-class cricket. Papps, who represented both Wellington and Canterbury, made 32 first-class centuries and was the first to score 10,000 runs in the Plunket Shield. He played 8 tests for New Zealand. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Alison Balance looks at the impact of myrtle rust, a year after it was first detected in New Zealand. William Dart celebrates the art of storytelling in song in New Horizons. And this week's Cultural Ambassador Chris Janidis celebrates the modern dancer Dimitris Papagiannou and what he has to do with the ancient Greek myth of Sisyphus and that boulder he was condemned to keep pushing up the hill.
And I drop in tonight's at 10. We'll be talking to people who have made the news or are just worth talking to. We'll have an eye on books, music and politics, keeping you up to date with the world at the other end of the day and bringing you breaking news as it happens. That's Lately with Karen Hay on Nights with Brian Crump on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow in the west from Northland to Vanuatu, including Coromandel Peninsula, Taumaranui and Taihape, cloudy periods and isolated showers. For the remainder of the North Island, mostly fine, however the odd shower about Bay of Plenty, Taupo and the Taradua district tomorrow, and possibly from Horowhenua to Wellington tomorrow evening. Westerly gales tomorrow evening and exposed parts of the Taradua district and Hawke's Bay south of Hastings. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, mostly fine, westerly gales and exposed places about the high country, the odd shower possible about the Sounds tomorrow evening. Bulla and Westland, occasional showers, some heavy tomorrow morning. Fiordland, rain or showers, some heavy. Otago and Southland, fine spells, but showers about coastal Southland and Clutha, spreading elsewhere for a time tonight and again tomorrow evening, westerly gales in exposed places. The Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with showers at times. It's just gone 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten. Let's return to Christchurch. We were there at the beginning of the program talking to David Townsend. Extraordinary that he was able to document the difference between what the scope said his damage was and what the contractor said his damage was and what the contractor had told EQC his damage was. Remarkable story. This is what's called an on-sold. A Christchurch homeowner says she has never been so angry in her life after being offered $48,000 today to fix a house with a repair bill of $260,000. Now, Georgina Hannafin and her husband purchased the home in 2013 with a $300,000 mortgage, believing it had been fixed after the earthquakes. They've now discovered the home will cost $260,000 to repair, but EQC has offered just $48,000. Checkpoint has chosen not to name the case manager who broke the news to Georgina this afternoon because we don't know how long he's been working on her case. But Georgina told our producer Bridget Burke a short time ago the offer leaves the couple with negative equity.
I received a phone call from EQC that I've been waiting on for the last 3 months regarding a settlement for our claim for botched repairs. They have given me, they've given me the settlement recommendations. They've apportioned it to the 2010 and to the 2011 claim. They've apportioned $6,796.07 to the September claim. They've apportioned $42,154.70 to the February claim, which gives me a total settlement amount of $48,950.77. So now I have a mortgage of $300,000, I have a house with $260,000 worth of damage, and I have $48,000 to fix it with because I do not have access to the previous owner's insurance.
Because this is an on-sold?
Because it's an on-sold property.
What are you going to do?
I honestly have no idea. I have no idea. This has been the catalyst in the end of my 15-year relationship. I have a 4-year-old son who has never known the person that I used to be, the laid-back, happy person that I used to be, and I shudder to think what effect this is having on my 4-year-old. I have no idea what I'm going to do.
And you have no opportunity to appeal this decision?
I've emailed back and told him that I'm not accepting that this is the final settlement for me, and I've also made it quite clear, he made it quite clear over the phone. He told me, he acknowledged that EQC did not carry out the inspections, the scope or the work sufficiently, and that if they had done it right the first time round, they would have pushed it over cap and the original owner would have had to deal with the insurance company. So because of the negligence of EQC, I now find myself in a position where I'm left with an asset with negative equity, and my hands are tied. I can't sell it, I can't repair it, and EQC is solely responsible for this.
Who is Is that the guy that rang you from EQC?
Is the settlement specialist.
For EQC?
He's a loss adjuster for EQC.
And he has said to you that it was because of the insufficient original scope?
He said to me specifically over the phone that EQC did not carry out the inspections, scope or work sufficiently, and that if they had done it right the first time, I would not be in the position that I am today. He apologised, and I said to him, I thank you for your apology, but your apology is not going to fix my house. I don't want anything that I'm not entitled to. I don't want a house that is worth more than what I paid for my house. All I want is what I thought I was buying at the time that I purchased the house.
How much did you pay for that house?
$360,000. And it's now, we had it valued a year ago, 2 years ago, and we could sell it as is for about $197,000. And we've owned it since 2013. So my number one asset has dropped in value from $375,000, which is the GV, down to $197,000 due to no fault of my own. I've never been so angry in my life.
Georgina Hannafin talking to our producer Bridget Burke a short time ago. We've gone to the Minister's office for comment. We'll try and talk to EQC about all of this. This is another scoping issue. Earlier in the program we heard from David Townsend, the same thing. Inadequate scopes early on, damage missed, then the home is sold or insurance deals are done. Now, of course, statute of limitations are coming in, and if you don't discover the damage before the clock has ticked, you find yourself in very real trouble. We've just got an email from Ken who says sometimes EQC didn't miss the damage, it just said the damage was not earthquake related, so it was not liable to pay for it. The problem is EQC's narrow interpretation of its liability. We get so much feedback when we run these stories. These issues still unfolding over 7 years on. Northland people campaigning for a safe road to Auckland have reacted angrily today to claims that it was never really going to happen. They're upset this government scrapped the plans to build a 4-line divided expressway all the way from Northland to Auckland. But the Transport Ministers dismissed the scheme as well, a National Party pork barrel promise that was never really going to happen. Lois Williams reports.
State Highway 1 from Whangarei to Auckland is the sort of road that can make you wish you'd updated your will before you set out, at least until you hit the motorway. Much of the road north is winding, potholed and dangerously narrow in parts for the many trucks that take Northland produce south. The National-led government's plan to rebuild it in stages over 20 years is now dead in the water. The Transport Minister Phil Twyford told Northland civic leaders the bad news last week. Whangarei's Mayor Cheryl Mai says it was a shock.
It would be fair to say that we were all gobsmacked because we felt that we were definitely on track. We knew that there had been a slight change in focus, but we still felt that the justification was there.
Mr Twyford says the national government went around the country like Father Christmas, promising communities roads for political gain. And he says the 4-lane highway plan was simply too expensive. Mr Twyford says State Highway 1 does need work, but he won't be the one making that call.
It's not my power and my decision to make on particular roading projects and how much money gets spent on them. Under our system, those decisions are made at arm's length of the politicians by the New Zealand Transport Agency. And the point of that policy is to keep politicians out of kind of pork barrelling and promising particular roading projects.
But the chair of Northland's Road Transport Committee, John Bain, says the region and roading authorities had already decided what needs doing, and that's a 4-lane road to cut the serious crash rate. Mr Bain says planning was well underway for the next stage, rebuilding the notorious stretch from Whangarei to Te Hana.
It had taken years of work from a number of people, not only in the councils but also in the NZTA, and we've worked very, very closely with the guys from the NZTA, and so we're right on the button for that 4-lane highway as the first tranche of taking that 4 lanes to Auckland from Northland. We had tremendous support from everybody, including the NZTA.
Mr Bain says if anyone's playing Santa Claus on a pork barrel, it's the new government, and he says in this case Santa's a rip-off.
When we get a road of $500 million cancelled and a $5 million roundabout given in place of it, that's when I start to see red. And that's Shane Jones's great media release a couple of weeks ago saying that he was doing the roundabout, when the roundabout that he's talking about was all part of the $500 million road. It was already planned, and the funding and everything was due to come out this year.
The Transport Agency, in a statement this week, acknowledged the uncertainty over the road to Whangarei. In a supplied statement, it says it must now develop a new state highways investment strategy.
The Transport Agency can't comment on future plans for specific transport projects, including Whangarei to Te Hana, until we have greater certainty about what the final government policy statement will guide us to invest in, and which projects we will deliver to meet the new government priorities. We acknowledge the frustration that this may result in for communities and people who may be affected by this project.
Submissions close on the government's new roading policy statement on May the 2nd. For Checkpoint, Lois Williams.
Thank you, Lois. Feedback coming in from Clive about the plane, Southwest Airlines flight. We're just about to talk about this. Hi, John. Loss of pressurisation is something that airline pilots train for twice a year. Loss of an engine would be the most trained for event in any airline training program. However, having both happen simultaneously is not an event usually trained for. No. I suspect it's not. But the captain, thanks Clive, the captain of Southwest Airlines Flight 1380 has been praised as having nerves of steel after she landed the plane safely following these terrible events that we've described earlier in the program. The incident has prompted a mass safety check of other Southwest Airline 737 engines after preliminary findings revealed one of the 24 fan blades had failed. Bridget Burke on the flight and the woman who got it down.
Southwest 1380. I understand your emergency. Let me know when you want to go in.
Yeah, we have a part of the aircraft missing, so we're going to need to slow down a bit.
Southwest 1380, speed is your discretion. Maintain at any altitude above 3,000 feet, and you let me know when you want to turn base.
All right, down to 3,000.
The calm voice of Captain Tammy Jo Schultz speaking to the control tower as a crisis unfolded in the main cabin of Southwest Airlines Flight 1380 yesterday. One of the first female fighter pilots in the American Navy, the 56-year-old looked for the nearest airport, her plane with a blown-out engine. As the cabin became depressurised, panicked passengers put on their oxygen masks and sent goodbye messages to loved ones.
Okay, could you have the medical meet us there on the runway as well? We've got injured passengers.
Injured passengers, okay, and is your airplane physically on fire?
No, it's not on fire, but part of it's missing. They said there was a hole and someone went out.
I'm sorry, you said there was a hole and somebody went out? Southwest 1380, it doesn't matter. We'll work it out there. So the airport's just off to your right. Report it in sight, please.
South 1380, airport's in sight.
Flight 1380 was only 20 minutes into its journey from New York to Dallas when the left engine exploded, hurling shrapnel into the window where bank executive Jennifer Ardern was sitting in row 14. The mother of two was partially sucked out as passengers, including real estate agent Tim McGinty, unsuccessfully tried to save her life.
I think the window blew probably about the same time. I guess the shrapnel busted the window. And anyway, so, we were locked in tight as we could be, bracing ourselves because we were falling. I think we fell 10,000 foot in 5 minutes or something. That pilot was brilliant and awesome and saved everybody's life. So anyway, during that period, somebody screamed, and back behind us on the left, the poor lady was hanging out the window and locked in by her seatbelt. So I went to try to get her in, and I couldn't. I just couldn't do it. I could not do it. I get her a little bit, not enough. And guy Andrew showed up, and between the two of us, we finally got her in. And he and RN that was on the plane started CPR. They started, trying to resuscitate her and kind of trying to evaluate her. Anyway, but that pilot could have had a bad 5 minutes, and it would have been the end.
Southwest Airlines is now focusing on what caused the engine to blow up mid-air.
We are very concerned about this particular event. Engine failures like this should not occur, obviously. And so, yes, we're very concerned about this. David, to be able to extrapolate that to the entire 737 fleet, I will say that if we find the need, if we feel that this is a deeper issue, we have the capability to issue urgent safety recommendations.
The National Transportation Safety Board said preliminary findings cited metal fatigue and a broken fan blade. Southwest Airlines and other airlines with the same CFM56 engine are now conducting urgent inspections of at least 8,000 aircraft. Independent aviation journalist John Ostrower said the incident could signal a much bigger problem.
Just to give you a sense of how prevalent these engines are in the world, this is probably the most produced jet engine in operation right now, without a doubt. The 737 next gen, there have been thousands upon thousands of these engines delivered over the last roughly 20 plus years or so. So this is like mandating inspections on all the engines on all the Honda Civics and Toyota Camrys in the world. This is an incredibly popular aircraft engine and really the backbone of global air travel.
149 people were on board Flight 1380. The National Transportation Safety Board's investigation will include reviewing cockpit recordings, collecting photos and videos from 144 passengers, and interviewing crew members, all of whom had received training on how to deal with engine failure, rapid decompression and emergency landings. For Checkpoint, Bridget Burke.
Reports coming in of power outages in Auckland in the suburb of Epsom. We're just trying to work out why. There have been no storms or anything significant in Auckland this evening, but we are hearing power is out in parts of Epsom. The government is moving to make it harder for people to build houses and lifestyle blocks on productive land. A new report out today called Our Land 2018 shows New Zealand's urban sprawl is eating up some of the country's most versatile land. It also shows millions of tonnes of soil are being lost every year through erosion. Millions. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
The report makes for sombre reading. A staggering 192 million tonnes of soil are being washed or blown out to sea from New Zealand every year. A Deputy Secretary at the Environment Ministry, Penny Nelson, says the soil that's left behind isn't in a good way either.
This includes 33% of soils have tested as having elevated phosphorus levels. Phosphorus primarily comes from how we use fertiliser on our land. And if it's at high levels, what it can do is travel into our waterways.
The report highlights that between 1990 and 2008, 29% of new urban areas were built on some of the country's most versatile land. Lifestyle blocks are also having an impact. In 2013, those blocks covered 10% of New Zealand's best land. The Environment Minister, David Parker, says one area that's particularly at risk is Pukekohe, known as Auckland's food basket.
We obviously need more housing around Auckland, but we also need to protect our elite soil. So we're proposing a national policy statement under the Resource Management Act, which will require the councils, when they're planning where to allow subdivisions or even rural lifestyle properties, they will have to make sure that they don't encroach upon our most precious soils.
David Parker says the horticultural sector has been saying for some time that too much of its best land is being lost to housing and lifestyle blocks, and it's time to take some action. He says soil compaction is also a big problem, with the air spaces being squeezed out of the soil by stock, meaning its ability to hold water is limited. Mr Parker says the report reinforces that it's important to control some of the excessive intensification of land in some areas.
We don't think that a conversion of a land into more intensive production, for example, going from sheep and beef into dairying, should be a permitted activity. It should be something that the council has a look at to impose or to require conditions that ensure that the soil health is preserved and that you look after your waterways.
David Parker says he's asked officials to start working on a more comprehensive freshwater national policy statement to deal with concerns about sediment, wetlands and estuaries. So more national policy statements in the pipeline. But can these statements actually make any difference? Forest and Bird says they can. Here's its Chief Conservation Advisor, Kevin Hackwell.
We're really pushing nature, we're pushing our soils, and it's nature, so our freshwater, everything else that actually is paying the price. And so it is important to have rules, and so far the system has failed. The previous rules we've had, regional councils, their plans have not been able to deal with these issues adequately. And so having national rules is certainly a significant part of it.
Kevin Hackwell also wants the government to withdraw irrigation subsidies completely and better invest in conservation to protect the flora and fauna that do remain. Atu I te whare parimata mō te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Chris Bramwell ahau.
6:26, green is the new yellow for Wellington buses. The first batch of new buses set to hit Wellington streets have arrived from the UK. They are diesel powered, but the manufacturers claim they're almost cleaner than fresh air. Laura Dooney went to, well, have a sniff and a look.
The buses are slightly smaller than the old Wellington fleet. They're a limey green instead of the traditional yellow on the outside, but they do look familiar. Inside, the priority seating is green, yet the back rows are the well-known blue with yellow bars.
So we've got a really comfortable driver's area and a special seat. So this is probably the most expensive driver's seat you can get. Very comfortable because obviously they spend a long time. This is their office.
The buses were custom built to suit the needs of transit, which will look after 60% of the region's bus routes. The president of Optier, Graham Belgium, says the Euro 6 engines are what make the emissions on the diesel-powered coaches so low.
This is almost putting out air that's cleaner than the air that it draws in. That's how good Euro 6 engines are, because what it's got is, in the back of it, it's got a big chemistry set. So what it does is it purifies the air that's coming out of the engine, and that's why you get such low emissions.
Transit's 235-strong fleet will have 114 Optier buses, and also include 10 electric double-deckers, built by Tauranga company Kiwi Bus Builders. Managing Director Paul Snellgrove says bus riders will be getting a new experience with transit, one he hopes they like.
We hope it's a good experience for the commuter. Wellington's very passionate about its public transport and we've got a lot to live up to. Our reputation's on the line on this one.
Transit has come under fire over its new driver contracts, with the union, Tramways, taking them to the Employment Relations Authority over pay and conditions. The case is expected to be heard later this month. One of Transit's driver trainers, Tua Turara, says he wasn't involved in the union's decision to go to the authority. Mr Turara says the new buses and the new seats are comfortable.
I had the privilege of bringing one of the fleet down from Auckland down to Masterton. I thought it was great to drive, really enjoyed it, nice and smooth.
Transit says the new buses will go into service in a few weeks' time and the electric double-deckers will start in July. For Checkpoint, Laura Dooney.
About a minute and a half to go. Let's end tonight with a lot of feedback coming in all of a sudden on the 4-lane highway that isn't now happening between Northland and Auckland. Oh, so the government decides, this person says, tell the families of the people killed on those rubbish roads who die that it's just politics. So that's one point of view. This person, though, Paul, says, I can't believe that Northland's mayors really thought they were going to get a 4-lane highway anytime soon, considering that it's taken over 20 years to get the Auckland-Hamilton Road 4-laned. What a National Party beat-up. And this person, Bill, well, Bill's sort of somewhere in the middle. I drive between Auckland and Whangarei very frequently and do not recognise the outback track your reporter described in her introduction. Warkworth is sometimes a problem, but otherwise it's usually a steady and pleasant drive, says Bill from Whangarei. Bill, that bit of road between, what is it, Warkworth and Wellsford, Dome Valley, people come off the motorway and think they're Ayrton Senna. Everyone's going crazy, the traffic's backed up. I hate it. You must have a calmer disposition than me, brother. Anyway, thank you for your feedback. We really appreciate it. Thank you for your company. On behalf of our really excellent and hard-working team, that is Checkpoint for this evening. We will be back tomorrow night at 5, but just before we go, happy birthday, Taylor.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Pike River Re-entry Minister says today's short walk into the mine's entry tunnel reveals the magnitude of the task ahead. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade has joined 2 other government agencies which have used the controversial security firm Thompson & Clark. People who made submissions on a medicinal cannabis bill will be able to withdraw them or make anonymous if they want to avoid criminal charges. And a survey carried out last month found 52% in favour of a regional fuel tax in Auckland, with 43% against. Our next news and weather is at 7. And this is Trending Now, our feature highlighting the stories you've been sharing via digital and social media. Here's an interview from Kim Hill's Saturday morning programme.
The prevailing wisdom is that global warming will lead to an increase in sea levels and low-lying